This is an excerpt, and we're going to talk now about lunar exploration. Look at this interesting thing. There's a report here from an American specialist that was translated here at Globo talking about China and NASA, the United States, planning to install nuclear reactors on the moon. Russia also talked about this, but Russia isn't in a position to do anything, right? So, the specialist is explaining these projects in light of space law. Wow! If you install a reactor on the moon, does the moon become yours? Do you become the owner of the moon? How does that work? Because, you see, as I tell you, our law is very connected to natural law. Natural law, as Locke once defined, private property is determined by the first person who delimits and uses a certain region. So it automatically becomes theirs, right? So the country that puts a reactor on the moon will become the owner of the moon. Is that how it's going to work? And who will it be? Will it be the United States? Let's understand this case. This news was suggested by Kakaina Magnet, Strike on the Left, and several other people. Thanks to the people who suggested news on our website, Visa on Libertarian.com. Well then, both countries have plans to install nuclear generators on the moon. This is not as complex as it may seem. You know, there are nuclear generators of various sizes, of various types, and some of them are quite simple. For example, if you take those satellites that orbit the Earth, and even Voyager, those satellites that are exploring the solar system, actually, they have already left the solar system and are exploring the universe. All of them are powered by a nuclear generator. They have nuclear material that decays, generates energy, and so on. And this has the advantage of being highly reliable, working very well, operating for a long time, and generating a reasonable amount of power. So placing a nuclear component like that on the moon is trivial, right? Both countries are planning this. The question is what type of nuclear reactor they are planning to build on the moon. Because as I said, these nuclear reactors that power satellites are almost like a non-rechargeable battery. A battery that you place there, it functions for a while, as long as the material still has nuclear capacity. But there will come a point when the ability to produce energy runs out, and then it's simply discarded. There are other nuclear reactors, like ANCAP-1 and ANCAP-2. These are uranium reactors, much more complex, but they are large reactors. This is a reactor that requires people to operate it. What type of reactor exactly are they talking about? They say the first space race was about flags and footprints. Obviously, the United States won that first space race. In fact, to this day, no other country has sent people to the moon. They've sent spacecraft. Yes, there have been several spacecraft on the moon, but people only the United States so far. The new race is to build there, and that depends on energy, right? So what are they saying? The idea now is to build a base on the moon to eventually have people there more consistently. You would need energy. Well, again, it all depends on what they mean by nuclear reactor, the size of that reactor, what type of reactor it is, right? Because depending on the reactor, it could be something trivial that doesn't even make a difference in the end, right? Although it may seem like a sudden race, this is not exactly new. NASA and the U.S. Department of Energy have spent years quietly developing small nuclear power systems to supply lunar bases and mining operations and long-term habitats. So what they're looking for here is something intermediate. It won't be a giant nuclear plant like ANCAP-1 or ANCAP-2, but it will be larger than the power sources used in satellites and such. They want something to power a small base on the moon. Exactly what the design of this thing will be, I don't know. Certainly, the radioactive material will have to come from Earth. There are no known uranium mines on the moon, so the whole thing will be very dependent on Earth anyway, but that's their focus here. Now, the big news here, the point in this whole story is, what rights does this give to the people exploring the spot on the moon? That is, do they gain ownership of the moon? The interesting thing is this, right? You already have the answer. Libertarian ethics already explains how property rights work. Property rights go to whoever gets there first, obviously, but remember, it's the first one to delimit, use, and defend that area. So it's not enough to just put a reactor there on the moon and say, oh no, now it's fine. Now there's nothing else. Now the moon is mine. No, because your reactor occupies a piece of the moon, it doesn't occupy the whole moon, right? And you don't have the capacity, or at least one imagines that initially you wouldn't have the capacity to defend that reactor of yours. If someone else arrives there and destroys your reactor, what are you going to do? If you don't have people there, don't have someone to actually occupy that area, right? So just placing the reactor there doesn't mean you'll own the entire moon, even under anarcho-capitalist law, under libertarian ethics, right? They discuss here the legal framework already exists. But it's interesting, because they say the legal framework already exists precisely in international law, and as I've already explained to you in several videos, international law is basically libertarian ethics. It's the same as libertarian ethics. If you look at international law, folks, we already live in ANCAP-SU-US. We already live under occupation. All of international law, how this connection between countries works, follows exactly libertarian ethics, follows anarcho-capitalist principles. So it's the same thing. If you establish a nuclear station there, you'll own the place where the station is located, the area you're using. Imagine if you're defending that area, you put some defenses there, so that area becomes yours, but not the whole moon. Now, if you create a lunar station there, a reactor, and you station troops there, deploy soldiers, and delimit an area on the moon that would be yours, and start defending that area, then according to libertarian ethics, yes, you would become the owner of that area. And this also appears to be the case. According to what is stated here in international law, the non-binding United Nations resolution of 1967 is not cited, but the 1992 resolution is mentioned. Relevant principles for the use of nuclear energy sources in space. It recognizes that nuclear energy can be essential for missions where solar energy is insufficient, which is the case on the moon. The moon does have access to solar energy and so forth, but the truth is that it wouldn't be sufficient for a human colony to sustain many people on the moon, nor for the entire lunar surface, because there are regions on the moon that don't receive much sunlight. Would international law, in this case, allow this kind of thing, right? Why is being first important? Because of Locke, because of private property and libertarian ethics, because the foundation of private property is exactly this. The first one who used that area, who marked and defended that area, the area is his. There's no question about it, right? He's the first. It's logical. He's the one who's going to mark it out, right? Well, is this going to happen? I don't know if it will happen, okay? Because there are other problems with it. The biggest problem with establishing a base on the moon is the water issue. In other words, water is very heavy. And human beings, to survive, need a lot of water. So one thing is doing what the Americans did in the 70s, sending people there with a little water and such, and the person would stay there for a little while. And then, now, to have a permanent base on the moon, you need a lot of water on the moon. The moon has no water. There's a suspicion that some craters in certain locations on the moon may have water, right? And if they do, then things get interesting because you can extract water there on the moon. But even that is of little significance. Why? Because maybe there isn't that much water. Maybe there's just some ice. But there isn't much, and then you have a problem because you'll use up that water, and then what do? Human beings need water to live. We need a lot of water to live. We don't realize this here on Earth, because having water on Earth is relatively trivial. On the moon, water would have to be brought from Earth. That's extremely expensive. Water is very heavy. Anyway, the moment there's a human installation, a human military base defending an area, have no doubt that according to libertarian ethics, that area belongs to that person, that country, whoever established it, because it's also possible that a private company might do this. Elon Musk has already said he wants to colonize Mars, for example. So then, would that Mars colony belong to Elon Musk or to the United States? But I have another question that I also find interesting in this discussion. Because we're talking about libertarian ethics speaks of use, appropriation, and defense by human beings, right? So if there's a base with humans there, nobody doubts it, but many people are concluding that perhaps the best way for humans to explore Mars or the moon would be, at least initially, with robots, right? In other words, you would send robots there to do the bulk of the work, and eventually, perhaps in the future, when there's already reasonable infrastructure, humans could go there. Why? Because robots are much easier to manage, for example. Robots can survive with very little water, having energy from their batteries. And with that nuclear power plant, they would have energy, so you could use robots for this. Then comes the big question. Is a robot occupying an area subject to the same libertarian ethics? If a robot uses that area, whose property is it? The robot's or the robot's owner? So there are a number of interesting ethical questions in this scenario. I find it quite fascinating. My view, as I've told you before, is that libertarian ethics is an agreement between human beings. So ultimately, if there's a robot on the moon, it could be used to demarcate and defend an area, making it property, but not the robot's property. It would be the property of the robot's owner, the human being. Ultimately, libertarian ethics is an agreement between humans. There's no other alternative. Other species, robots, and other entities are not part of this framework. Anyway, this is all very fascinating. I hope to see this happen. I hope to see humans on the moon. I think it would be amazing. Who knows? I might still experience lunar tourism myself. This was a dream back then, and it kind of stopped because this space race had great momentum in the 70s and then stopped completely. This is absurd. Who knows? Maybe it will happen again. Thanks for watching the video to the end. Besides liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel, consider becoming a sponsor with amounts starting from $1.99. Click the join button below to learn about the conditions and benefits of sponsoring the channel. For more information about our project, visit our websites shown on the screen